In 1933, a tiny mustached incel seized power in Germany. Yes, Hitler was an incel. Debate me if you want, but the dude didn't get laid until days before he committed self-deletion. Either way, the crazy man with a tiny mustache seized power due to Germany dealing with a massive inflation. The Treaty of Versailles had a provision in it where Germany had to pay a war debt to France. The Great Depression made things a lot worse, so people were hungry and poor. Hitler was able to seize power because he did what all politicians who stoke fear in their populace do: use a scapegoat for the troubles of the country. It still happens today. It's just instead of communists and Jews, it's immigrants, Muslims, and communists. So using rampant anti-Semitism, he was able to seize control, outlawed all parties except the Nazis, and restarted the German war machine, which led to World War II, yada yada yada. Tiny mustache man was a bitch, and anyone who latches onto his ideals of the Nazi party nowadays is an anti-Semite hard. But back then, not all Nazis were assholes who wanted to kill all Jews and other minorities. Some joined the party because of the fact they were the only party, and some did because they were loyal to the country. Not to say Nazis aren't assholes, just some, like Oskar Schindler, actually didn't dive fully into the dogma of let's blame the people who everyone has blamed in history for their problems. I dislike Nazis. I dislike anyone who hates another human being just because their religion, skin color, or whatever they're from is different. Even Ghost hates Nazis, right Ghost? Ghost says yes. This video is going to be on how Hitler ended up losing the flagship of his navy, the Kriegsmarine. This is the story of a ship that he was so proud of that he boasted how many ships it would sink. And then the British were like, nope. So without further ado, let's talk about how the British chased down one ship and the outcome of an epic naval battle that started in the Strait of Denmark and ended in the northern Atlantic. This is the story of the Bismarck. During the 1930s, there was a series of treaties with the European powers to attempt to stop another world war from happening. This included limiting new battleships, so France and Britain really didn't have any new shiny toys. But Hitler decided to ignore these treaties when he built up Germany's military. So when Britain and France relied on World War I era ships retrofitted with new technology, Hitler ordered the creation of the Bismarck-class ships, the Bismarck and the Tripits. Named after the famed German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, these ships were both 50,000 tons and 823 feet long. Large, fast, top speed of 30 knots, carried on it 4 twin-gun turrets with 15-inch guns, 2 of them being forward, codenamed Anton and Bruno, 2 of them being aft, codenamed Caesar and Dora. This is major firepower, but it had more: 12 5.9-inch guns, 16 4-inch guns, 16 1-inch guns, and 12 anti-aircraft guns. It also carried a float plane for reconnaissance. Pretty much, this ship was a floating death machine. And also, it was built to withstand torpedoes with a thick steel plate in the hull. On February 14, 1939, it was christened by Dorothy von Lovenfeld, with Hitler making a speech. Soon after, the British became aware of it. Quick side note, I should point out that I have seen many people in videos refer to the Bismarck as a she, as customary with ships, but the Germans were slightly sexist at the time, so the Bismarck was always considered a he to them. On August 24, 1940, he was commissioned and set sail from Hamburg to Creole Bay. From there, the crew did very little of note in all of 1940. With the war raging, France falling, all looked bleak for Great Britain. But Britain's allies in the US were sending merchant ships packed with supplies such as weapons, food, ammunition to the country. The danger was the U-boats in the Atlantic. But the German war machine sent orders to the Bismarck to leave port in northern Poland, to head to the Atlantic to disrupt supply convoys. Alongside the heavy cruiser the Prince Eugen, they were to use the Denmark Strait to break free and cause havoc. Once they departed, the Luftwaffe provided air cover. But a Swedish cruiser spotted them and informed the British Admiralty of the movement of the flotilla heading out towards the Danish Straits. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park also confirmed that they were heading for the Atlantic, so Admiral John Tovey boarded the King George V to give his orders. King George V was the only battleship that the Navy had that could equal the Bismarck. But the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen were headed to the Denmark Strait, and Tovey was 100 miles away from there. Orders to patrol the Denmark Strait were given. If the Bismarck broke through, then the supply lines could be cut and Britain would be forced to surrender. The Norfolk and the Suffolk patrolled the strait between Greenland and Iceland, while further south the Hood and the Prince of Wales patrolled. The Norfolk and the Suffolk would spot the Bismarck and Prince Eugen on May 23, 1941. Both ships were no match for either, they only had 8-inch guns. So both ships fell back and hoped that the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen wouldn't fire. To their surprise, they didn't. Using radar, they tracked the movements of both ships, staying far enough behind the two ships to keep radar contact, but also far enough back to where the Bismarck and Prince Eugen couldn't spot them. That same night, the Hood and the Prince of Wales were having their own issues. Their escort destroyers had to turn back due to the choppy waves and wintry weather, leaving a battle of flagships to take place. The Hood was a battleship from World War I and the flagship of the British Navy. This ship was really beloved, and I mean it. It was really looked at as the might of the British Navy. The Prince of Wales, though, was a newer ship that had some issues. Its turrets and guns would malfunction, leading to constant repairs. Both of these ships would clash with the Prince Eugen and the Bismarck in the Denmark Strait. Running parallel to the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen, the orders to engage were given. The Hood and the Prince of Wales turned on an interception course, having their firepower but protecting themselves from being broadsided. Thinking that the lead ship was the Bismarck, they fired on the lead ship, only to realize that it was the Prince Eugen and not the Bismarck, and their opening salvo fell short. The Prince of Wales' turrets failed soon after. Then, the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen unleashed hell on the Hood and the Prince of Wales. A shell from the Prince Eugen smashed into the Hood's deck, smashing through and into an ammunition locker. It opened the deck with an explosion. Admiral Lancelot Holland on the Hood, realizing too late that he had been targeting the Prince Eugen instead of the Bismarck, ordered the Hood to turn port, bringing the aft guns to take on the Bismarck. Luckily, the Hood's turn caused the Bismarck to miss with its next attack. With the focus on the Hood, the Prince of Wales was able to get into range for one hit. This hit would prove to be crucial later, but the Bismarck's attack would smash into the Hood's bow and stern, bracketing it. One more shot from the Bismarck and the Hood exploded into two, the salvo hitting the main munitions chamber on the Hood. Admiral Holland would go down with his ship. The Bismarck and the Prince Eugen would turn their attention to the Prince of Wales, captained by John Leech. The Prince of Wales fired, hitting the Bismarck again, but then the Bismarck answered in kind with a shell that passed through the bridge of the Prince of Wales without exploding. Only Leech and 2 officers survived. The rest had died. For 3 minutes, the Prince of Wales was battered before it was able to retreat to safety. Out of the 1,418 crew members aboard the Hood, only 3 survived. Once word got to Winston Churchill, he only had one order that would go out to the whole entire Royal Navy. A simple order. Sink the Bismarck. The Bismarck wasn't badly hit, but it was taking on water and one of the boiler rooms had to be abandoned. It was also leaking fuel. The commanding officer, Admiral Gunther Lütjens, had to make a decision, go back to Norway or to break for France. He decided France was the best option. Planes over the Atlantic began to follow the trail of oil that the Bismarck was leaking. Meanwhile, the shock of losing the Hood was so much that Churchill ordered Tovey to destroy the Bismarck with every ship he can. The only issue is Tovey was still lagging behind, and the Norfolk and the Suffolk, shadowing the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen, did not have the firepower to do much of anything. At one point, the Norfolk and the Suffolk lost track of the 2 ships. The Bismarck had turned, fired a shot at them, making them break off. Once they were able to get the Bismarck back on the radar, it was alone. Admiral Lütjens had ordered the cover fire so the Prince Eugen can get away. They had lost the Bismarck again for over 36 hours, but codebreakers at Bletchley Park were able to confirm that the Bismarck was headed for France. Reconnaissance pilots were able to find the Bismarck again, one of them being an American pilot because at the time, though we were not at war yet, Roosevelt sent military personnel over to train the British military. In other words, we were at war without declaring war yet. The closest ships that could do damage to the Bismarck was Force H, the HMS Sheffield, the HMS Renown, and the aircraft carrier Ark Royal with its Swordfish torpedo bombers aboard. Swordfish are biplanes that can get up to 100 knots. Made of cloth and steel, they can take the massive amounts of bullets and not go down, but they are considered slow when it came to aircraft, and they were only able to carry 1 torpedo at a time, but these aircrafts were enough. Anti-aircraft guns had a hard time hitting them, and the night of May 25th, 1941, 15 of these aircrafts would set off on a suicidal run that would make blowing up the Death Star in the first Star Wars look easy. I'm going to skip the crazy moments where the Swordfish almost targeted one of their own ships, or the time they mistook a US merchant ship, mostly because I want to get to the battle proper. With anti-aircraft tracer rounds zooming past them, these brave men flew straight at the Bismarck. The torpedoes they dropped did little damage to the Bismarck, all except one. You see, the Bismarck had a couple of fatal flaws. One being that its radar would stop working if the guns were fired, another being that its weakest spot was the rudders behind the ship. One hit would send the rudder right into the propeller, and in the middle of a fight, that is hard to fix. Which is what happened. One lucky pilot hit the stern, forcing the rudder into the propeller when the stern opened and began to take on water, causing the Bismarck to do circles. Admiral Lutyens knew that he was royally f***ed because he radioed Berlin to give news that they would fight into the last shell. Just then, Tovey arrived on the King George V and accompanied by the Rodney. The British encircled and attacked from all sides. The last stand of the Bismarck had begun. On early morning of May 27th, the volleys began on both sides. But soon, two of the Bismarck's turrets were knocked out of action. Then, the artillery command center was destroyed. By 9:15 a.m., the last shots of the Bismarck came. The ship was on fire from the heavy shells, and by 9:30 the last of the Bismarck's turrets were destroyed. With the hell going on in the Bismarck itself, I would imagine many wanted to surrender, but the British weren't there to accept a surrender. Enter torpedoing a helpless enemy. But all of that wasn't enough to sink the ship. Nope, it was deliberately sunk by the Germans. The call to abandon ship was given. The British moved in to rescue the survivors, but a U-boat was spotted. They fled. Out of the 2,000 men who served on the Bismarck, only 115 survived. So, Hitler didn't find out by his own people that his flagship had been sunk. He found out from the British press, which I expected was a lot of neener, neener, neener. Either way, he decided that warships were too expensive and guzzled up too much oil, so he decided to just go with U-boats in the Atlantic. Also, he really wanted to invade Russia, so he focused on that. Kinda sounds like a politician, bragging about how awesome your new toy is until it's broken, then it wasn't even worth it. When the Bismarck sank, it capsized, causing the turrets, which were only fixed in place by gravity, to slide out. The ship struck an extinct underwater volcano and slid down it, resting on the bottom like it would on the surface. Robert Ballard, the famous guy who found the Titanic, was able to find the Bismarck on June 8, 1989. James Cameron visited the wreck, filmed for the 2002 documentary Expedition Bismarck. He pretty much loves shipwrecks, so it's not surprising. He actually put a plaque on the wreck. This was a battle for the seas. It decided if Britain could continue to fight or would be forced to actually submit. The men and women who served during this battle proved their bravery, but most importantly, it proved that the Nazi war machine could be broken, and in the coming months and years, the cracks in the machine would lead to a full breakdown and the end of Hitler's tyrannical stranglehold. Unfortunately, 6 million Jews would suffer and die at the hands of these assholes before that could happen.